Good morning. Beautiful day. Beautiful day outside and beautiful day inside. We're really blessed this morning. Study this morning is in the first chapter of Ezekiel. That may be a surprise, but we've been studying Jeremiah and Lamentations, and Ezekiel is a prophet in the first, or in that neighborhood, let's say. Prophet in at the same time frame. He's contemporary with other prophets that we've been studying. So we're going to have a good study in the book of Ezekiel. Let's bow for just a moment we begin our class this morning. Father in heaven, we're thankful unto Thee for the blessings that we enjoy. Thankful for the opportunity we have for Bible study, and thankful for the opportunity for worship today. We ask Thy blessings on all of our services this day, and help us to focus on what we're doing here today. Help us to leave ready to serve and to do good. In Jesus' name, amen. Now, every scripture has a context, of course. The book of Ezekiel has a context, a little background. And the background for Ezekiel, at least one of the backgrounds for Ezekiel, is in the 24th chapter of 2 Kings. 24th chapter of 2 Kings. Now, as we've been indicating from time to time, the Jerusalem was carried away into captivity, and it was assaulted in stages. There was a major assault during the reign of Jehoiakim. And then there was another major assault in the reign of King of Judah, Chin. And then there was another assault in the days of the last king of Israel, or of Judah. So Chin, then followed by Zedekiah. So a third major assault. Now, I suppose there were other skirmishes in between those major assaults. But each time there was an assault, there were captives. And in the 24th chapter of 2 Kings, we have get some insight into what was happening during that era. In chapter 24, in his days, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up, and Jehoiakim became the servant 3 years, and then he turned and rebelled against him. So there, that assault, apparently Jehoiakim agreed to the terms of Nebuchadnezzar, and he was allowed to reign at that point in time. And then in verse 2, and the Lord sent against him bands, that is, after he revolted, the Lord sent against him bands of Chaldeans, and bands of Syrians, and bands of Moabites. Now, these other countries were now, captured. They were under the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, so he controlled the Syrians, the Moabites, the Ammonites, and probably other peoples and cultures in that area. And he sent them against Judah to destroy it, according to the word of the Lord, which he spake by his servants the prophets. Surely at the commandment of the Lord came this upon Judah. Of course, as we studied many times, we've mentioned many times, God was orchestrating these attacks on Jerusalem. Surely at the commandment the Lord came upon Judah to remove them out of his sight for the sins of Manasseh, according to all that he did. Now, Manasseh wasn't the only one that was in the evil mode. In verse 4, and also because for the innocent blood that he shed, for he filled Jerusalem with innocent blood, which the Lord would not pardon. Now, the rest of the acts of Jehoiakim and all that he did, are they not written in the Book of Chronicles? And we could turn to the 36th chapter of Chronicles to get some insight in that, but we won't do that at this point. In verse 6 of 24 of 2 Kings, Jehoiakim slept with his fathers, and Jehoiachin, his son, reigned in his stead. And the king of Egypt came up not any more out of his land, for the king of Babylon had taken from the river of Egypt unto the river Euphrates, and all that pertaineth to the king of Egypt. So Egypt was also figured into this scenario, but Egypt was taken out by Babylon, and so that kind of ended that did end Egypt's assault on Jerusalem. Now then in verse 8 of 24 of 2 Kings, Jehoiachin was 18 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned in Jerusalem 3 months, and his mother's name was Nehushta, the daughter of Elnathan of Jerusalem. And he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord, and according to all that his father had done. At that time, the servants of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up against Jerusalem, and the city was besieged. Now this was at least the second assault on Jerusalem by Babylon. And Nebuchadnezzar, in verse 11, king of Babylon, came against the city, and his servants did besiege it. And Jehoiachin, Kim was earlier than that, Jehoiachin, king of Babylon, or king of Judah, went out to the king of Babylon, he and his mother and his servants and his princes and his officers, and the king of Babylon took him in the 8th year of his reign. So Jehoiachin gave up. He held up the white flag, and he gave up, didn't fight back, and he carried out thence all. Now here's Nebuchadnezzar. He carried out thence all the treasures of the house of the Lord, and the treasures of the king's house, and cut in pieces all the vessels of gold which Solomon, king of Israel, had made in the temple of the Lord. Now, about everything in the temple was overlaid with gold, and I'm sure they were chipping it off, breaking off pieces, and I suppose, some of the military people were putting it in their pockets or whatever they had to hold things, and so they were just in the mode of destruction. In verse 14, and he carried away all Jerusalem and all the princes and all the mighty men of valor, even 10,000 captives, and all the craftsmen and smiths. None remaineth save the poor sort of people of the land. He got the talent, those craftsmen. He got the talented people. He got the upper echelons, those that were the ruling class, 10,000 of them. And he carried away Jehoiachin to Babylon, and the king's mother and the king's wives and his officers, and the mighty of the land, those carried away into captivity from Jerusalem to Babylon. And all the men of might, even 7,000, among the 10, 7,000, and craftsmen, smiths, 1,000, all that were strong and apt to war. So he got those that were, healthy and able to fight. And I suppose he put them some of those people into his army to fight other peoples. So it was at this point that Ezekiel was probably carried away into captivity. And who else was carried away into captivity that was prominent in that Babylonian? Daniel was carried away. And of course Meshach, the three Hebrew children that were carried away. into captivity. Well, so what we have here then was Daniel at the throne, and he was very prominent in that Babylonian empire. He was he was right under the king, and he held sway. He had influence. Kings are influenced by people. He was really influencing what was going on in the Babylonian government. Now, I'm not suggesting he was making the major decisions, but he was influential there. So we have him, at the throne room, so to speak, and then we have Jeremiah is back in Jerusalem, and Ezekiel is among the captives. Apparently they moved some of the captives into a particular area of the country, of the empire, and Ezekiel was among those that were Ezekiel was among those that were captive. Now, the book mentions that, and by the way, Ezekiel's name has to do with strength. Names in that period, had some meaning. Today we just name kids after some popular person or we just like a name, and it doesn't particularly have any significance. But in that era, the name had some significance, and Ezekiel's name meant strength. Now he needed strength because, according to his own words, God says, or according to the words that he recorded, God said, "You're being sent among a rebellious people." Now wait a minute, rebellious people had been subdued, had been carried away captive. They ought to have been pretty humble and compliant and seeking the law of Moses and seeking God, but they're rebellious people, so he needed strength. Now, he starts out in the first chapter of Ezekiel, right? In the very first chapter, there's a lot of symbolism about something. It's kind of like, the symbolism was about the spiritual realm. It was about God. I wonder why, at this point, God gave him that vision. I wonder why. Why do you suppose Ezekiel needed some reassurance about God? Why would he need some reassurance?
Well, he saw everything being destroyed, the temple being destroyed, everything around him being destroyed.
Yeah, he's in captivity, hundreds of miles from his home. The first 24 chapters of Ezekiel talk about the fact that Jerusalem is going to be destroyed, and he's there by the river of Kedar, which was a canal, among a rebellious group of captives, and he had not a good day. He probably never had a good day. So he needed some reassurance that God was still on the throne. Nebuchadnezzar, of course, was the ruler of the known world, and he was captive. But he needed some reassurance that God was on the throne, that God was in control. And so this imagery, this vision that he had was very interesting. Now, it's pretty hard to, it's just pretty hard to, fit this thing together. All these wheels and all of the stuff that he talks about here. But this isn't, this isn't unusual. I mean, when John was on the Isle of Patmos, and Tim preached about, went through the Book of Revelations a while back, but in the fourth chapter, there's a Revelation. There's a vision or a kind of a description. John was introduced to kind of a description of the spiritual realm. Now, obviously, our minds can't wrap around what heaven is about, what God, in fact, our minds can't wrap around some things about God. We can't completely understand. But in the fourth chapter of Revelation, there's a lot of imagery here, a lot of physical terms that try to describe something in the spiritual realm. Well, and John says in chapter 4, verse 1, after this, I looked, and behold, a door was open in heaven. And the first voice which I heard was as it were of a trumpet. There's sound, lots of sound in these imageries of the spiritual realm. A trumpet, and then immediately I was in the Spirit. Behold, a throne was set in heaven. Okay, now, in the first few verses of the first chapter of Ezekiel, we're going to have an image of a throne, among other things. There's a throne there, and he that sat was to look upon like a jasper and a sardine stone. And there was a rainbow. Now, in Ezekiel's vision, there's a rainbow. Okay? A rainbow around about the throne, in sight like unto an emerald, description of precious jewels here. And round about the throne, 24 seats, and upon the seats I saw 24 elders sitting clothed in white raiment, and they had on their heads crowns of gold, and out of the throne proceedeth lightnings. Wow. Ezekiel sees a big storm. Well, and there were 7 lamps and fire burning. Ezekiel has vision of fire burning before the throne, which are the 7 spirits of God. And before the throne were like a sea of glass, like unto crystal. In the midst of the throne, and round about the throne, were 4 beasts full of eyes before and behind. Ezekiel's vision here contains information about wheels, and wheels within wheels, and they were full of eyes. See, there's some representation of heaven knowing all things seeing all things that are going on earth. And then in verse 7, and the first beast was like unto a lion, and like unto a calf. The third beast had the face of a man, and the fourth beast was like a flying eagle. Well, now, in Ezekiel's thing, there's an ox or calf. The face is like an ox or a calf, like an eagle. Secondly, like a man. So the same kind of imagery here. Now then, and the 4 beasts, each of them 6 wings about them. Well, there's wings in these creatures that Ezekiel sees. And then in verse 8, and those beasts gave glory and honor and thanks to him that sitteth on the throne, who liveth forever and ever. And so on. Now, back to Ezekiel, we have this imagery that is pretty, it's pretty detailed, kind of hard to figure out. Now, some people, and I read this in the Apologetics Press, the new Bible, the Bible they devote to evangelism, the Apologetics Press, and many of you have that. And in some introductory remarks to Ezekiel, they point out, the writers there point out that some of the people that look for UFOs, unidentified flying objects, some of those people say, aha, even Ezekiel talked about unidentified flying objects, UFOs, well, he's not talking about, some people from outer space or some creatures from outer space here. This is an image of God. Now, here's kind of an outline of what he sees. First of all, there's a big storm coming from the north. Okay? Big storm. Now that's and there's lightning and thunders. Big storm. Then he sees a chariot. Now this chariot is borne by 4 beasts, 4 creatures, living creatures of some kind, he sees. And these creatures have 4 different faces. Each of them have 4 different faces. One of an ox, one of an eagle, one of a man, and there's a 4th face there, calf, ox, lion. Yeah, lion. Thank you. So each of these creatures have 4 faces, and they have wings. Now, where do we find wings in the Old Testament? Well, we find it in the tabernacle, and the cherubims' wings. Not only do they have wings, but they have feet that are like calves' feet. Okay? And not only that, but they have wheels. And these wheels, there's a wheel within a wheel. One wheel, and there's a wheel perpendicular to the other wheel. So you've got wheels, going both ways. Pardon me? Yeah, that would be their version of that would be the UFO seekers' version of a flying saucer. Wheels within wheels. But these wheels had eyes. Well, then these 4 creatures that had all these characteristics that we've mentioned, they are bearing up this chariot. And then he sees something else. He sees kind of a platform on which there's a throne. So he's got a platform, throne. What did John see in the Revelation? A throne. And then he sees above the throne some more of this cherubim thing, and above that, a rainbow. Now, what does all this mean? I mean, I think we could speculate till the cows come home, as they used to say on the farm. think we could speculate about, the meaning of all of these things. The rainbow has a significance, right? The significance of the rainbow is that, there's some better days ahead. The storm's over, okay? But to figure out all these creatures, the characteristics of these creatures, I'm not sure that in our era we can figure all of that out. Now, Ezekiel might have been able to figure it out. But what happened to him when Ezekiel saw all of this, when he took in all this, everything that accompanied this big storm that he saw, what happened to Ezekiel? Fell over. Was overcome. Now, I don't think Ezekiel understood. My opinion is that Ezekiel didn't understand all of this, but he did understand one thing, and that is God is on the throne. He understood that even though he was hundreds of miles from home, even though he was among the captives, even though Jerusalem was going to be destroyed, God's presence is still there. And this, in the first chapter of Ezekiel, is all about showing that God's presence was with them. Now, in the New Testament, how did the apostles show that God's presence was there? Miracles, right? In some cases, a vision. Peter had a vision, right? Which indicated, the presence of God. So, and as we said before, Ezekiel needed the reassurance that God was still in the mix. God was still in this. And in fact, God's presence was there in Babylon. Even though Jerusalem was going to be destroyed, even though bad things were going to happen, God is still in the mix. And so in Ezekiel chapter 1, verse 1, now it came to pass in the 30th year. Most people that are scholars in Old Testament history believe that was his, age. May have been something else. It may have been something dated to Jehoiakim's being carried away, but or some event in the past. But it's probably his birth, the years of his or his age. In the 30th year, in the 4th month, in the 5th day of the month, I was among the captives by the river Chebar. That the heavens were opened, and I saw visions of God. So, that's what all this imagery is about, visions of God. In the 5th day of the month, which was the 5th year of King Jehoiakim's captivity, and probably, as we said, Ezekiel was among the captives of the Jehoiakim's captivity. And the word of the Lord came expressly unto Ezekiel, the priest. Now Ezekiel, was a priest, he was a prophet. Now whether Ezekiel was an acting priest when he was still in Jerusalem before the captivity, that's up to speculation. He may have been priest. He may, but he may not have been either. But he being of that tribe and of that, that position, he was probably known, well known among the captives who were transported to Babylon along with him. He was probably well known and had some stature with them and had some prestige with them, with the people. And they probably, and we'll see in the study of Ezekiel, they at least some of them had some respect for him, which was pretty important in that situation. So the word of the Lord came expressly into Ezekiel the priest, the son of Buzi, in the land of the Chaldeans by the river Chebar. And the hand of the Lord was there upon him. And now, you see, I looked, and behold, a whirlwind. I don't know, tornadoes maybe. It was just a violent storm. Anyway, look and behold, out of the north a great cloud, and fire enfolding, that is, flashing continually. Once in a while we get a storm when the sky is continuously lit up with lightning. And that's it's kind of scary, isn't it? When the whole sky is lit up and there's just lightning cracking all around. That would have been an attention getter. And this storm was just flashing, and it was black cloud, but it was flashing, and the brightness is about it. And out of the midst thereof, the color of amber, out of the midst of fire. And out of the midst thereof came the likeness of 4 living creatures we mentioned here earlier to give an overview of this. And this was their appearance. They had the likeness of a man, and everyone had 4 faces, and everyone had 4 wings. So 4 faces, 4 wings. And their feet were straight feet, and the sole of their feet was like the sole of a calf's foot. And they sparkled like the color of burnished brass. Oh, it was an awesome sight. It was penetrating. Those various colors, no doubt, were penetrating to his eyes. And they had hands of a man under their wings on their 4 sides. And they had 4, and they 4, all of them, had their faces and their wings. So they had wings and feet. Well, they're going to have something else here pretty soon. And the wings were joined to another, and they turned not when they went, and they went every one straight forward. So these creatures were just, and they're carrying this chariot. They were just, they could just float anyway. And I suppose, that's those UFO people think, wow, this is, these spaceships, they can just move wherever, So I suppose that's, if you stretch your imagination long enough, you could fit some UFOs into this whole discussion. Well, let's go back to verse 10, and it's for the likeness of their faces. They 4 had the face of a man and the face of a lion on the right side, and they had the face of an ox on the left side, and they 4 also had the face of an eagle. The king of the animals, king of the birds. Ox has to do with strength, and man has to do with the world, man dominating the world, as God decided man to be the shepherd, have the responsibility for the earth. Verse 11, thus were their faces and their wings were stretched upward. 2 wings on every one were joined one to the other, and 2 covered their bodies. And they went every one straight forward, whither the Spirit was to go. And they went, and they turned not when they went. That is, they just kind of moved smoothly around. And as for the likeness of the living creatures, their appearance was like burning coals of fire. And like the appearance, and notice this, the word appearance, I think in this chapter is like 15 or more times. The appearance, it was like. He was trying to describe this. In human terms, he's trying to describe all of this. And it appeared like burning coals of fire. And like the appearance of lamps, it went up and down among the living creatures. And the fire was bright, and out of the fire went forth lightning. Now this would have been, that's been an awesome thing, awesome sight. And the living creatures ran and returned as the appearance of a flash of lightning. So this must have been a quick, movement, a startling movement. In verse 15, now as I beheld the living creatures, behold, one wheel upon the earth by the living creatures with his 4 faces. These wheels must have had something to do with the chariot, and they could go, any way, up, down, wherever. So they had feet and wheels for, when they bound to the earth. Then they had wings when they moved upward. And then verse 16, and the appearance of the wheels and their work was likened to the color of beryl. That's another precious gem. And they 4 had one likeness, and their appearance and their work was as it were a wheel in the middle of a wheel. Parallel, or not parallel, but across. Verse 17, perpendicular, that is. Verse 17, and when they went upon their 4 sides, and they turned not when they went. Now this is, smooth movement. And as for their rings, they were so high that they were dreadful. And their rings, the rims, were full of eyes round about them 4. All of them had eyes on the rims of those wheels. Verse 19, and when the living creatures went, the wheels went by them. These wheels were, they paralleled the movements of the living creatures, and were lifted up from the earth. The wheels were lifted up, so wings, these creatures bearing this chariot, and then lifted up. The wings lifted them up. They had calves' feet on the ground and wheels on the ground. Verse 20, whithersoever the Spirit was to go, and they went thither, was their spirit to go. And the wheels were lifted up over against them, for the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. The living creatures apparently were controlled by these wheels. Verse 21, and when those went, these went. When those went, these went. And when those stood, these stood. And when those were lifted up from the earth, the wheels were lifted up over against them. for the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. Now, the sense here was that everything's coordinated. This whole thing was orchestrated, coordinated. It was kind of a symphony, a symphony of fire and brimstone, so to speak. And verse 22, and the likeness of the firmament upon the heads of the living creatures was as the color of a terrible crystal, or an awesome crystal, stretched forth over the heads there. So here's another, a kind of a separate vision here, that this kind of a platform or a firmament, a structure, was kind of a second iteration here. And under the firmament were the wings straight, and one toward the other. And every one had two, which covered on their side. And every one had two, which were covered on that side, their bodies. So somehow there was this firmament, this structure above that kind of floated along in this scene. In verse 24, and when they went, I heard the noise of their wings, like the noise of great waters. And as the voice of the Almighty, the voice of speech as the noise of a host. When they stood, they let down their wings. So, when they set foot on the earth, their wings obviously down. Verse 26, and above the firmament, above this structure, this platform, above the firmament that was over their heads was the likeness of a throne. They're going to be Nebuchadnezzar's throne? Not so. It was the throne, as the appearance of sapphire stone. What the book of John, 4th chapter, or the Revelation, the 4th chapter, there was that idea of that sapphire stone, the throne. And upon the likeness of the throne was the likeness of the appearance of man above it. And I saw him as the color of amber, as the appearance of fire around about within it, from the appearance of his loins even upon upward, and from the appearance of his loins downward, I saw as it were the appearance of fire. It had brightness around about, as the appearance of the bow that is in the cloud above. And so here's a third kind of iteration. This bow around about. The appearance of the bow that is in the cloud in the day of rain. A rainbow. So was the appearance of brightness round about. This was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of God. So what was all of this imagery about? It was about the glory of God. That's beyond description. Now this is a pretty, Ezekiel was putting into words kind of what he saw in the vision. Is it hard to figure out what all is really what he saw? Kind of hard for me to figure out everything that he saw, right? But we'll have to suppose he did the best he could to describe this situation. If all of us in the auditorium saw a particular situation and were asked to write about it, probably there would be 50 different versions of what we saw. Ezekiel wrote about what he saw, but I'm sure it was hard to put into words what he saw. Something like a chariot, something like these beasts, something like, wheels. I'm sure he had difficulty in putting into words what he saw there. But what is all of this about? It's about the glory of God. This was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of God. He's trying to describe what he saw there. But it was all about trying to put into man's language the glory of God. And when I saw it, I fell upon my face, and I heard a voice of one that spake. Now, this next part of this next chapter looks like it should be with the first chapter. And he said unto me, and the voice said, Son of man. By the way, we'll see that expression, Son of Man, throughout the book of Ezekiel. Son of man, stand upon thy feet, and I will speak unto thee. He fell on his face. The voice said, Get up. I've got something to say to you. I will speak unto thee. And that's kind of where we'll end our study today. Ezekiel had to be assured that even though he was in this awful circumstance, that God is still in control of things. That's the message of chapter 1.